The blizzard hit the Montana territory with such fury that Delilah Preston thought she might freeze to death before sunrise, and she almost welcomed it after everything she had endured in the past 6 months. She had traveled from Ohio in the summer of 1883, following her brother Marcus, who had promised her a fresh start out west after their parents died of scarlet fever. But Marcus had been killed in a mining accident 3 weeks after she arrived, leaving her alone in the rough town of Ventura, Montana, with nothing but a small trunk of belongings and $20 to her name. She had taken work at the boarding house, cleaning rooms and serving meals to miners and cowboys who passed through, saving every penny she could to buy passage back east when spring came. But winter had arrived early and with a vengeance, and now she stood shivering in the drafty barn behind the boarding house, trying to calm the horses who whinnied nervously as wind howled through the cracks in the walls. Mrs. Henderson, who owned the boarding house, had sent her out to check on the animals when the storm began, and Delilah had been out here for nearly an hour, her fingers numb inside her thin gloves, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. She was 20 years old, far from home, and so desperately cold that she genuinely considered just lying down in the hay and letting the winter take her. At least then the loneliness and grief would stop. At least then she would not have to face another day of scrubbing floors and dodging the wandering hands of drunk miners while pretending her heart was not broken into 1,000 pieces. The barn door suddenly flew open, slamming against the wall with a crash that made Delilah jump. A man stumbled in, covered head to toe in snow, his hat barely clinging to his head. He shoved the door closed with his shoulder and stood there for a moment, breathing hard, before he noticed her standing in the shadows. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "What are you doing out here in this weather?" "I work at the boarding house," Delilah managed to say through her chattering teeth. "Mrs. Henderson sent me to check the horses." The man brushed snow from his coat and came closer, and in the dim light of the lantern hanging from a post, Delilah could see his face. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that looked almost gray in the lantern light. His jaw was covered in several days' worth of stubble, and there was a scar running through his left eyebrow, but his face was kind. "That woman should be horsewhipped for sending you out in this," he said, pulling off his gloves. "You are frozen half to death. Come here." Delilah hesitated, but the man did not wait for her permission. He crossed the space between them and started rubbing her arms briskly with his bare hands, trying to get her blood flowing. His hands were rough and calloused, but warm, and she could not help but lean slightly toward that warmth. "I am Warren Quincy," he said as he worked. "I have been staying at the boarding house for the past week. I saw you serving breakfast yesterday morning." "Delilah Preston," she whispered. Warren frowned as he looked at her more closely. Her lips had a bluish tint, and she was shaking so badly he could hear her teeth rattling. "How long have you been out here?" "I do not know. An hour maybe." He cursed under his breath and started unbuttoning his heavy wool coat. "You need to get warm right now, or you are going to lose fingers and toes, maybe worse." "What are you doing?" Delilah asked, confused as he shrugged out of the coat. "Keeping you alive," Warren said simply. He wrapped the coat around her shoulders, and it was so warm from his body heat that she nearly cried. But he was not done. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and rubbing her back, her shoulders, trying to transfer his warmth to her frozen body. Delilah knew she should protest. It was not proper for a man to hold her like this. But she was so cold, and he was so warm, and she could not remember the last time anyone had touched her with such gentle care. So she let herself lean against his chest, feeling his heart beating steadily beneath her cheek, and slowly, the terrible cold that had seeped into her bones began to recede. "There you go," Warren murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "Just hold on. You are going to be all right." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped together in the dim barn while the storm raged outside. Delilah gradually stopped shaking, and Warren gradually stopped rubbing her back, but neither of them pulled away. There was something comforting about being held, about not being alone in the darkness and cold. Finally, Warren spoke. "Can you feel your fingers and toes?" Delilah flexed her hands inside his coat and wiggled her toes in her worn boots. "Yes, they hurt, but I can feel them." "Good. That is good." He pulled back just enough to look down at her face, his hands still resting on her shoulders. "What possessed that woman to send you out here alone?" "She needed someone to check the horses, and I am the only one who works for her besides her husband, and he is sick with a fever," Delilah explained. Her voice was steadier now, though she still felt tired and weak. Warren's jaw tightened. "She could have waited until morning or asked one of her boarders. Hell, she could have asked me. I would have done it." "You are very kind," Delilah said quietly. "Thank you for helping me." "Do not thank me for basic human decency," Warren replied. He was still frowning, and she realized he was genuinely angry on her behalf, which was such an unexpected thing that it made her throat tighten with emotion. She had been so alone for so long. Marcus had been all the family she had left, and when he died, she felt as though she had been cut loose from the world, drifting with no anchor and no one who cared whether she lived or died. Mrs. Henderson treated her like a servant, the boarders treated her like furniture, and no one in town seemed to notice or care that she existed. But this man, this stranger, had risked the storm to check on the horses and had found her instead, and now he was angry that someone had put her in danger. "We should get back inside before we both freeze," Warren said, but he made no move to let her go. "I still need to finish checking the horses," Delilah said reluctantly. "Mrs. Henderson will be furious if I come back without making sure they have enough feed and water." "Then I will help you," Warren said, releasing her at last and picking up a bucket. "Where is the feed kept together?" They finished the work quickly. Warren was clearly experienced with horses, moving confidently even in the dim light, and the animals seemed to sense his calm assurance and settled down. When they were done, he picked up the lantern and gestured toward the door. "Stay close to me," he said. "The storm is getting worse, and I do not want you blown away." They stepped out into the blizzard, and Delilah gasped as the wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Warren immediately put his arm around her shoulders, tucking her against his side, and together they fought their way across the yard to the back door of the boarding house. Snow stung her face and eyes, and the cold was so intense it made her lungs ache, but Warren's arm was solid and strong, and he did not let her stumble or fall. When they finally made it inside, Delilah leaned against the wall, panting, while Warren bolted the door shut. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the hallway, her thin face pinched with irritation. "It is about time," she said to Delilah. "I was beginning to think you had run off. Did you finish everything?" "Yes, madam," Delilah said quietly. Mrs. Henderson's eyes flicked to Warren, and her expression shifted slightly, becoming less harsh. She was a shrewd woman who understood that her boarders paid good money and deserved respect. "Mr. Quincy, can I get you anything? Some hot coffee, perhaps?" "No, thank you," Warren said coldly. "But Miss Preston here needs something warm to drink and a place by the fire. She nearly froze to death in that barn." Mrs. Henderson's mouth tightened. "Miss Preston has work to do in the kitchen." "Miss Preston needs to warm up," Warren said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Otherwise she will get sick, and then where will you be?" You just said your husband is already ill." For a moment, the two of them stared at each other, and Delilah held her breath, certain she was about to be dismissed from her position. But Mrs. Henderson was the one who looked away first. "Fine," she said shortly. "Delilah, go warm up by the stove in the kitchen. 20 minutes, no more. Then I need you to start preparing dinner." "Yes, madam," Delilah whispered. She handed Warren's coat back to him, already missing its warmth. "Thank you again, Mr. Quincy." Warren looked like he wanted to say something else, but Mrs. Henderson was standing right there, so he just nodded. "Take care of yourself, Miss Preston." Delilah hurried to the kitchen, where a large cast iron stove radiated blessed heat. She pulled a stool close and sat down, holding her hands out to the warmth, and only then did she let herself truly absorb what had happened. A stranger had shown her more kindness in an hour than anyone in Ventura had shown her in months, and the memory of his arms around her, his voice murmuring comfort, made something in her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. She could not afford to feel this way. She was leaving as soon as the spring thaw came, going back to Ohio where she had friends and a few distant cousins, where she would never have to see another mine or another mountain as long as she lived. Montana had taken her brother and nearly taken her life tonight, and she was done with it. But even as she made that resolution, she could not stop thinking about Warren Quincy's gray eyes and gentle hands. The storm lasted for 3 days, trapping everyone in the boarding house. Delilah worked from before dawn until late at night, cooking meals, washing dishes, cleaning rooms, and trying to stay out of Mrs. Henderson's increasingly foul mood. The older woman hated being cooped up, and she took her frustration out on Delilah with sharp words and impossible demands. Warren noticed. Of course he noticed. He seemed to notice everything about her, watching from his place at the dining table as she served meals, his gray eyes following her as she moved around the room. On the second day of the storm, when Mrs. Henderson snapped at Delilah for serving the coffee lukewarm, even though there was nothing Delilah could have done to keep it hot while carrying the heavy pot from the kitchen, Warren spoke up. "The coffee is fine, Mrs. Henderson," he said mildly. "And Miss Preston has been working like a dog since sunrise. Maybe you could ease up on her a bit." Mrs. Henderson's face flushed. "Mr. Quincy, I hardly think you are in a position to tell me how to manage my own employee." "I think anyone with eyes and a conscience is in that position," Warren replied, his voice still mild but his eyes hard. "The girl is exhausted." Delilah wanted to sink through the floor. The other boarders were all watching now, curious and entertained by the confrontation. Mrs. Henderson looked furious, but she also looked uncertain, and Delilah realized that Warren Quincy must be someone important, someone with money or influence, because Mrs. Henderson did not snap back at him. She just pressed her lips together and turned away. "Fine," she muttered. "Delilah, take a break. Go rest for an hour." Delilah fled before Mrs. Henderson could change her mind. She went to the tiny room she shared with the kitchen maid, a girl named Sarah who had gone home to her family before the storm hit, and sat down on her narrow cot. Her whole body ached with fatigue, and her hands were red and raw from scrubbing. She had been in Montana for 6 months, and every day felt like a year. Every day, she missed her parents and her brother. Every day, she wondered if she would ever feel happy again. There was a soft knock on her door and she hastily wiped her eyes, not wanting anyone to see her crying. Yes, the door opened a crack and Warren peered in. "Miss Preston, can I talk to you for a moment?" Delilah stood up quickly, smoothing her apron. "Of course. Is something wrong?" Warren came in and closed the door behind him, which was improper, but Delilah was too tired to care about propriety. He looked around the small, cold room with its bare walls and single window, and his expression grew troubled. "This is where you sleep?" he asked. "Yes." "It is not much, but it is enough." Warren turned to look at her, really look at her, and Delilah wondered what he saw. A skinny girl with dark circles under her eyes and chapped hands. A woman who had been beaten down by life and was just trying to survive. "Why are you out here?" he asked quietly. "You do not belong in a place like this." Delilah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I do not belong anywhere, Mr. Quincy. My parents died of scarlet fever last year. My brother Marcus brought me out here, promising we would make a new life, but he died in a mining accident 3 weeks after we arrived. I have no family left, no money, and nowhere else to go. So I work for Mrs. Henderson, and I save every penny, and when spring comes, I am going back to Ohio." That is the whole sad story. Warren's face softened with sympathy. "I am sorry, that is a lot of grief for one person to carry." "Yes, well, life is not fair, is it?" Delilah sat back down on the cot, suddenly too tired to stand. "I appreciate you speaking up for me at dinner, but you do not need to worry about me. I can take care of myself." "Can you?" Warren asked, and there was something in his voice that made her look up. "Because from where I am standing, it looks like you are barely holding on." The words cut too close to the truth, and Delilah felt tears burn her eyes again. She looked away, not wanting him to see. "I am fine." "No, you are not," Warren said gently. He crossed the small room and sat down on the cot beside her, careful to leave a respectable distance between them. "You are exhausted and grieving and working yourself to the bone for a woman who treats you like dirt. And you were about to give up out there in that barn the other night. I could see it in your eyes." Delilah's breath caught. She had not thought anyone could see that. "I was just cold." "You were more than cold," Warren said. "Delilah, look at me." She turned her head reluctantly, and his gray eyes were so kind, so full of understanding that something inside her broke. "I was so cold," she whispered, "and I was so tired, and I thought, what is the point? What is the point of any of this? My family is gone. My home is gone. I have nothing and no one, and I am so tired of being alone." Warren reached out and took her hand, folding it carefully between both of his. "You are not alone right now. You are leaving when the storm ends," Delilah said. "Everyone leaves." "Maybe I do not have to," Warren said quietly. Delilah stared at him, not understanding. "What do you mean?" Warren hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "I am a rancher. I have a spread about 30 miles north of here, near the Yellowstone River. I came into town to buy supplies and check on some cattle I sold, and then the storm hit. But my ranch is still there, waiting for me, and it is a good spread. Profitable. I have a foreman and 3 ranch hands who work for me, and a house that is big enough for a family, even though it is just me living there right now." "Why are you telling me this?" Delilah asked, though her heart had started to beat faster. "Because I have been alone for a long time too," Warren said. "My parents died when I was 18, and I have been running the ranch by myself ever since. I have always been too busy to think about settling down, about finding someone to share my life with. But then I saw you in that barn, and I saw how brave you were, how strong, even when you were at the end of your rope. And I thought, this is a woman worth knowing. This is a woman I could love if she would give me the chance." Delilah's eyes widened. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Warren said. "I know you work hard. I know you have a kind heart because I saw the way you talked to those horses, soothing them when they were frightened. I know you have been through hell and you are still here, still fighting. That is more than enough for me." "You are asking me to marry you." Delilah could barely believe she was saying the words. "I am asking you to consider it," Warren said carefully. "I know it is sudden. I know we are strangers, but I can offer you a home, Delilah." A real home, not a cold little room in a boarding house where you work yourself to death. I can offer you a chance at a new life, a good life. And maybe if we are lucky, we could offer each other something else too. Companionship, partnership, maybe even love someday. Delilah's mind was racing. It was insane. She had known this man for 2 days. She knew nothing about him except that he was kind and he had warm eyes and he made her feel safe in a way she had not felt safe in a very long time. But was that enough to build a marriage on? I cannot give you an answer right now, she said finally. This is too much. I need time to think. Warren nodded, not looking disappointed. Of course, think about it. We are probably stuck here for another day or two anyway. But Delilah, I want you to know something. I meant what I said. I think you are brave and strong and worth knowing. Whether you say yes or no, that does not change. He stood up, still holding her hand, and brought it to his lips for a brief, gentle kiss. Then he released her and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Delilah sat alone in the cold little room, staring at nothing, feeling the place where his lips had touched her skin. She thought about Ohio, about going back to a place where she knew people but had no family, where she would have to find work as a seamstress or a maid, where she would be alone for the rest of her life, unless she found someone to marry, which seemed unlikely given that she had no dowry and no connections. Then she thought about Warren's ranch near the Yellowstone River, about a house big enough for a family, about waking up every morning next to a man who looked at her with kindness instead of indifference or disdain. It was insane. But it was also tempting in a way that scared her. The storm finally broke on the 4th day, and the sun came out, turning the snow into a blinding white expanse that hurt to look at. The boarders began preparing to leave, checking out and settling their bills with Mrs. Henderson. Warren was among them, and Delilah watched from the kitchen doorway as he shrugged into his heavy coat and pulled on his gloves. He saw her watching and came over, keeping his voice low so no one else could hear. Have you thought about what I said? I have thought about nothing else, Delilah admitted, but I still do not know what to say. It seems so reckless, so foolish. Sometimes the best things in life are reckless and foolish, Warren said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a map to my ranch. And this, he pulled out a small leather pouch, is $50. Enough for you to get there on your own if you decide you want to come. I am not trying to buy you, Delilah. I am giving you a choice. A real choice, not just survival. Delilah stared at the paper and the pouch, her hands trembling. Why are you doing this? Because I see you, Warren said simply. And I think you see me too. That is rare, Delilah. That is worth taking a chance on. He pressed both items into her hands, then tipped his hat and walked out the door before she could respond. Delilah stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of the money and the map in her hands. Mrs. Henderson's voice called from the dining room, sharp and demanding, and Delilah automatically started to move toward it. But then she stopped. She thought about the rest of her life spent in cold little rooms, working for people who did not care if she lived or died. She thought about going back to Ohio, to a place that held nothing but memories of loss. She thought about being alone forever, never taking a chance, never risking her heart. Then she thought about Warren's gray eyes and gentle hands. She thought about the way he had held her in the barn, keeping her warm, keeping her alive. She thought about the way he had stood up for her to Mrs. Henderson, the way he had listened when she told him about her family, the way he had offered her a choice instead of making demands. She thought about how cold she had been in that barn, how close she had come to giving up entirely. And she thought about how it had felt when Warren pulled her close and said in that warm, certain voice, "Just hold on. You are going to be all right." She wanted to believe that. She wanted to hold on. She wanted to be all right, Delilah took a deep breath, walked back to the kitchen, and began to pack. It took her 2 days to make all the arrangements. She could not leave immediately because Mrs. Henderson would not let her go without giving notice, and Delilah needed those 2 days to work up her courage anyway. She kept the map and the money hidden under her mattress, taking them out at night to study the route Warren had drawn. His ranch was called the Lazy Q, and it was situated in a valley near the Yellowstone River, with grazing land that stretched for miles. He had drawn little notes on the map, marking places where she could stop to rest, warning her about a difficult river crossing, telling her to ask for a man named Bill Tucker at the general store in a town called Bridger Creek, who would help her find her way. The care he had taken with the map made her chest feel tight. He had thought about her journey, worried about her safety, tried to make it as easy as possible. That was the act of a good man, she thought. A man she could trust. On the morning of the 3rd day, she asked Mrs. Henderson for her wages and gave her notice. Mrs. Henderson was furious, accusing her of being ungrateful and foolish, but Delilah stood firm. She took her $30 in wages, added it to the $50 Warren had given her, and bought a train ticket to Bridger Creek. It was the farthest the train went. From there, she would have to hire a wagon or a horse to get to the Lazy Q. She traveled light, with just her small trunk and a canvas bag containing food for the journey. As the train pulled out of Ventura, she looked back at the town that had been her prison for 6 months, and she felt nothing but relief. Montana had taken so much from her, but maybe, just maybe, it was about to give her something back. The train journey took most of a day, rattling through mountain passes and across snowy plains. Delilah sat by the window, watching the landscape roll by, and tried not to think about what would happen if she was making a terrible mistake. What if Warren had changed his mind? What if his offer had been some kind of cruel joke? What if he was not the kind man she thought he was? But no. She had seen genuine care in his eyes, genuine concern. He had held her in that barn like she was something precious, something worth saving. She had to trust that. The train pulled into Bridger Creek just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Delilah climbed down onto the platform, clutching her bag, and looked around. Bridger Creek was even smaller than Ventura, just a handful of buildings clustered around the train station. But the general store was easy to spot, and she walked toward it on shaking legs. The man behind the counter was older, maybe 60, with a weathered face and shrewd eyes. "Help you, miss. I am looking for Bill Tucker," Delilah said. The man's eyebrows rose. "You found him. Who is asking?" "My name is Delilah Preston. Warren Quincy sent me. He said you could help me get to his ranch." Bill Tucker's face transformed, breaking into a wide smile. "Well, I will be damned. Warren said he met a young lady in Ventura, but I did not think you would actually come. Welcome, Miss Preston." "Welcome." Delilah felt a rush of relief so strong it made her dizzy. Warren had told people about her. He had been expecting her. This was real. "Can you help me get to the Lazy Q?" she asked. "I can pay." "Of course I can help," Bill said, waving away her offer of money. "But it is nearly dark now. You will stay at my place tonight, and I will take you out to the ranch first thing in the morning. Warren would have my hide if I let you travel in the dark." Delilah wanted to protest, wanted to see Warren right now, but she knew Bill was right. So she let him take her trunk and followed him to a neat little house behind the general store, where his wife, a plump, cheerful woman named Mary, immediately took charge of her. "Oh, you poor dear," Mary said, fussing over Delilah like a mother hen. "You must be exhausted from your journey. Come sit by the fire. I will get you some stew and fresh bread. Bill, go draw some water so she can wash up." Delilah found herself swept into the Tucker household as if she had always belonged there. Mary chattered cheerfully while she served dinner, asking questions about where Delilah was from and how she met Warren, clearly delighted by the whole romantic story. Bill sat at the table, grinning, and interjected comments about what a good man Warren was, how hard he worked, how respected he was in the area. "He is one of the best ranchers in the territory," Bill said. "Smart, fair, honest. You could not do better, Miss Preston." "I do not even know if he still wants me to come," Delilah admitted. "It has been 3 days." Mary laughed. "Oh, honey, he wants you to come. He stopped here on his way back to the ranch and told us all about you. He was so worried you would not come, so afraid he had scared you off." "That boy is smitten, mark my words." Delilah felt her cheeks heat. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes that is all you need," Mary said wisely. "A spark, a connection. The rest you build together." That night, lying in the Tuckers' guest room, Delilah could not sleep. Tomorrow she would see Warren again. Tomorrow her new life would truly begin. She was terrified and excited in equal measure, and she kept touching the ring her mother had given her, which she wore on a chain around her neck. "I hope I am doing the right thing, Mama," she whispered into the darkness. "I hope you would be proud of me." Bill drove her out to the Lazy Q in a wagon the next morning, taking a road that wound through pine forests and across open meadows. The snow was not as deep here as it had been in Ventura, and Delilah could see cattle grazing in the distance, their breath steaming in the cold air. After about 2 hours, they came over a rise and Bill pointed. "There it is, the Lazy Q." Delilah looked where he was pointing and caught her breath. The ranch house was beautiful, a sprawling log structure with a wide front porch and smoke curling from 2 chimneys. There were several outbuildings, including a large barn and a bunkhouse, and corrals where horses milled about. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks white with snow, and a river glinted silver in the morning sun. It looked like something out of a painting, wild and beautiful and perfect. "Warren built most of it himself," Bill said proudly. "He inherited the land from his parents, but the house and the barns, that was all him. He is a hell of a worker." As they drove closer, Delilah saw a man come out of the barn and stop, shading his eyes against the sun. Even from a distance, she recognized Warren's tall frame and broad shoulders. He stood very still for a moment, as if he could not believe what he was seeing, and then he started walking toward them, his pace increasing until he was almost running. Bill stopped the wagon, and Delilah climbed down on shaking legs. Warren stopped a few feet away from her, his chest heaving, his gray eyes bright. "You came," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I was so afraid you would not come." "I almost did not," Delilah admitted. "But then I thought about what you said, about taking a chance. And I realized I did not want to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." Warren closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. Delilah wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder, and it felt like coming home. "Thank you," Warren whispered against her hair. "Thank you for trusting me." "Thank you for giving me a reason to," Delilah whispered back. Bill cleared his throat loudly. "I will just unload Miss Preston's trunk and be on my way. You two have a lot to talk about, I am sure." Warren reluctantly released Delilah and went to help Bill with the trunk. While they were busy, Delilah looked around, taking in the ranch properly now. It was even more beautiful up close, the kind of place she could imagine building a life, the kind of place she could imagine calling home. "Come on," Warren said, coming back to her side after Bill drove away. "Let me show you around." He led her first to the house, carrying her trunk easily. The front door opened into a large main room with a stone fireplace and comfortable furniture, more spacious and well appointed than Delilah had expected. There was a kitchen with a big cast-iron stove and a wooden table, a pantry stocked with food, and down a hallway, 3 bedrooms and a small bathing room. "The master bedroom is there," Warren said, pointing. "But I had the guest room made up for you. I thought you might want your own space, at least at first, until you are comfortable with me, with all of this." Delilah's throat tightened at his consideration. "Thank you. That is very kind." Warren set her trunk down in the guest room, which had a real bed with a quilt and a window that looked out over the river. "I know this is all very strange," he said, "and I know we need to take time to get to know each other properly. I am not expecting you to marry me tomorrow or anything like that. I just want you to be here. I want us to have a chance." "So do I," Delilah said softly. "I am scared, Warren. I am scared this will not work, but I am more scared of spending my whole life alone." Warren took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "We will figure it out together, one day at a time." Over the next few weeks, they did exactly that. Warren introduced Delilah to his ranch hands, a grizzled older man named Pete, who served as foreman, and 2 younger men named Jack and Sam, who treated her with respectful courtesy. He showed her the cattle, the horses, the workings of the ranch, and Delilah listened and learned, fascinated by this world that was so different from anything she had known. Warren was up before dawn every day, working hard alongside his men, but he always made time for her. They had breakfast together every morning and dinner every evening, and in between, Delilah kept herself busy learning how to cook on the big stove and exploring the ranch. At night, they sat by the fire, talking for hours about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Delilah learned that Warren had inherited the ranch when he was 18, and his parents died of influenza. He had struggled those first few years, nearly losing everything, but he had worked tirelessly and learned from his mistakes, and now the Lazy Q was one of the most successful ranches in the area. He was well-liked and respected, honest and fair in his dealings, and he took pride in his work. Warren learned that Delilah had been a schoolteacher back in Ohio, that she loved to read, and had brought a small stack of books with her in her trunk, that she missed her family terribly, but was determined to build a new life. She was smart and curious, quick to learn, and she had a dry sense of humor that surprised him into laughter more than once. They grew comfortable with each other, bit by bit. Warren started reaching for her hand when they walked together. Delilah started leaning against his shoulder when they sat by the fire. The touches were innocent, tentative, but they were building something, a foundation of trust and affection that felt solid. One evening, about a month after Delilah arrived, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Warren turned to her and said, "I have to go into Bridger Creek tomorrow to meet with a cattle buyer. Come with me. Mary Tucker has been asking to see you, and I thought we could have dinner at the hotel. A real date," Delilah smiled. "I would like that." The next day, they made the journey to Bridger Creek in Warren's wagon, bundled in blankets against the cold. Mary Tucker was indeed delighted to see Delilah, and insisted on showing her the new fabrics that had just come in at the general store. While Warren met with the cattle buyer, Delilah spent a pleasant hour with Mary, looking at fabrics and listening to the older woman's cheerful gossip about the town. "You look happy," Mary said, studying Delilah's face. "Happier than when you arrived." "I am," Delilah admitted. "Warren is a good man. I feel safe with him, cared for." "You love him?" Mary asked bluntly. Delilah thought about it. "I think I am starting to. Is that foolish? It has only been a month." "Not foolish at all," Mary said firmly. "When you know, you know. And from the way that man looks at you, I would say he is more than halfway to loving you too." That evening, Warren took Delilah to dinner at the only hotel in Bridger Creek, a modest place but clean and comfortable. They sat at a corner table and ordered steak and potatoes, and Warren looked at Delilah across the table with such warmth in his eyes that it made her heart skip. "I am glad you came with me today," he said. "I like having you by my side." "I like being by your side," Delilah replied. "I never thought I could be happy again after losing my family. But you have given me hope, Warren. You have given me a reason to look forward instead of back." Warren reached across the table and took her hand. "I want to give you more than hope, Delilah. I want to give you a life. A real partnership. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build something together, something that lasts." Delilah's breath caught. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Yes," Warren said simply. "I know we agreed to take our time, and if you want more time, I will wait. But I also know what I feel, and I do not see the point in pretending otherwise. I am in love with you, Delilah. I think I have been since that night in the barn when I held you and felt you shaking from the cold, and all I could think was that I wanted to keep you warm and safe for the rest of my life." Tears filled Delilah's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think it was possible to fall in love this fast, but I have. You are kind and strong and everything I never knew I needed. Yes, Warren. Yes, I will marry you." Warren stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair, and he came around the table and pulled her to her feet, kissing her right there in the middle of the hotel dining room. Delilah kissed him back, not caring who saw, and the few other diners broke into applause and laughter. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. Warren cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I am going to make you so happy," he promised. "I swear it." "You already have," Delilah said. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the Tuckers' home, with Bill and Mary serving as witnesses. Delilah wore a simple blue dress that Mary had helped her make from the fabric at the store, and Warren wore his best suit, his hair slicked back and his eyes shining with joy. The local minister performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Warren kissed Delilah with such tenderness that Mary started crying. The newlyweds returned to the Lazy Q that evening, and Warren carried Delilah over the threshold, making her laugh. He set her down in front of the fire, which Pete had kindly stoked before leaving to give them privacy, and looked at her with such love that it took her breath away. "I am so glad you stayed," he said softly, echoing the words he had said that first night in the barn. "I am so glad you did not give up." "You gave me a reason to stay," Delilah replied. "You held me close and asked me to stay with you, and I could not say no." Warren pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and they stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, feeling the warmth and safety of being together. Later, he would lead her to the bedroom they now shared, and they would begin their married life in earnest, learning each other in the way newlyweds do, with tenderness and care and a growing passion that surprised them both with its intensity. But for now, they just held each other, and it was enough. The first winter of their marriage was hard. Montana winters were brutal, and there were days when the cold was so intense that it felt like the world itself might freeze solid. But Warren and Delilah faced it together, keeping each other warm, working side by side to keep the ranch running and the animals fed. Delilah learned to cook hearty meals that would sustain the ranch hands through long days of work. She learned to mend clothes and blankets, to preserve food, to manage the household accounts. Warren taught her to ride a horse and to recognize signs of illness in the cattle. She taught him to read aloud from her books in the evenings, something he had never had time for before, and they spent many nights curled up together on the sofa, lost in stories of adventure and romance. They laughed together. They argued occasionally, as any couple does. usually about small things like whether to buy a new bull or how much to spend on supplies. But they always made up quickly, neither of them willing to go to bed angry, and each disagreement taught them more about how to communicate, how to compromise, how to be partners in truth as well as name. By spring, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She told Warren one evening at dinner, simply setting down her fork and saying, "I think we are going to have a baby." Warren stared at her, his fork halfway to his mouth. "You think? Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor," Delilah said, "but all the signs are there. I have missed my courses for 2 months, and I have been sick in the mornings, and I just feel different." Warren dropped his fork and came around the table, pulling her up into his arms and spinning her around. "We are going to have a baby," he shouted, laughing. "Delilah, we are going to have a baby." Delilah laughed too, dizzy from spinning and from joy. "Yes, we are. Are you happy?" "Happy." Warren set her down and kissed her soundly. "I am over the moon. You have made me the happiest man alive." They went into Bridger Creek the next day so Delilah could see the doctor, an older man named Dr. Harris who confirmed what she already knew. She was about 2 months along, and the baby would come in the fall, probably October. Dr. Harris gave her instructions on how to take care of herself and warned her about the dangers of childbirth. But Delilah was not afraid. She had Warren, and she had a home, and that was more than enough. Over the summer, Delilah's belly grew round, and Warren became almost comically protective. He did not want her lifting anything heavy or working too hard, and he rearranged his schedule so he could spend more time at the house, hovering over her like a worried mother hen. Delilah found it both endearing and exasperating, and she finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not made of glass. "I know," Warren said, looking sheepish, "but I worry. What if something happens? What if I lose you?" Delilah took his face in her hands, feeling the stubble rough against her palms. "You are not going to lose me. I am strong, Warren. I survived the coldest night of my life, remember? I can survive this." "That is different," Warren muttered. "Back then I could hold you and keep you warm. I could do something. With this I am helpless. I cannot do anything except wait and worry." "You can be there with me," Delilah said. "You can hold my hand and tell me I am strong and brave. That is not helpless, Warren. That is everything." Warren kissed her, soft and sweet. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Delilah said. "Now stop worrying and help me plan the nursery. We have a lot of work to do before this baby arrives." They spent the rest of the summer preparing. Warren converted the smallest bedroom into a nursery, building a cradle with his own hands and sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Delilah sewed blankets and tiny clothes, marveling at how small everything was. Mary Tucker came to visit and brought gifts, practical things like diapers and a nursing shawl, and she gave Delilah advice about childbirth and motherhood, advice that Delilah listened to gratefully. In late September, Delilah woke in the middle of the night with a sharp pain in her belly. She lay still for a moment, wondering if it was false labor, but then another pain came, stronger this time, and she knew. She reached over and shook Warren awake. "Warren, the baby is coming." Warren shot up so fast he nearly fell out of bed. "Now, right now." "Yes, now," Delilah said, trying to breathe through another contraction. "You need to go get Dr. Harris." Warren was already pulling on his clothes, his hands shaking. "I will ride as fast as I can. Will you be all right alone?" "I will be fine," Delilah said, though she was not entirely sure that was true. "Just hurry." Warren kissed her hard and then ran out of the room. Delilah heard the front door slam and the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. She got up carefully and walked around the room, trying to ease the pain, and she thought about that night in the barn when she had been so cold, so close to giving up. She had been strong then. She could be strong now. The labor was long and hard, lasting well into the next day. Dr. Harris arrived around dawn, and Mary Tucker came with him, taking charge of the situation with calm efficiency. Warren stayed at Delilah's side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, telling her over and over that she was strong and brave and he loved her. When the baby finally came, just as the sun was setting, Delilah was exhausted but triumphant. Dr. Harris held up a squalling, red-faced infant and announced, "It is a boy." Delilah started crying, and Warren was crying too, staring at the baby with an expression of pure wonder. Dr. Harris cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Delilah's arms. She looked down at her son, her and Warren's son, and felt a surge of love so intense it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Warren leaned over, kissing Delilah's forehead and then gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Delilah. Thank you for this." "What should we name him?" Delilah asked. Warren thought for a moment. "What about Marcus, after your brother?" Delilah's eyes filled with fresh tears. Really, Warren said. "Your brother brought you west and that led you to me. I want to honor that. I want our son to know where he came from." "Marcus Quincy," Delilah said, trying out the name. "I like it." "Marcus Quincy it is," Warren agreed, and he kissed her again, soft and tender. Life settled into a new rhythm after Marcus was born. The baby was healthy and strong, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and he quickly became the center of their world. Warren proved to be a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with Marcus when he cried at night, and Delilah watched her husband with their son and fell even more deeply in love. The ranch continued to thrive. Warren made smart decisions about which cattle to keep and which to sell, and he invested in better breeding stock. He hired another ranch hand as the herd grew, a quiet young man named Tom who was good with animals, and Pete took Tom under his wing and taught him the ropes. Delilah took on more responsibility as well, managing the household accounts and corresponding with buyers. She discovered she had a head for business, and Warren came to rely on her advice. They were true partners, building something together, and that made everything they achieved feel more meaningful. 2 years after Marcus was born, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, because she was born in the spring when the wild roses were blooming. Rose had Warren's stubborn chin and Delilah's quick smile, and she was spoiled rotten by her older brother, who took his role as protector very seriously. 3 years after that, another son arrived, a big, healthy boy they named Henry after Warren's father. Henry was a happy baby who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the world with wide, curious eyes. The house that had once seemed so big now felt perfectly sized, full of laughter and noise and love. Warren built an addition to make more room, adding another bedroom and expanding the kitchen. Delilah planted a garden and taught the children to read. They went to church on Sundays in Bridger Creek, where Marcus, Rose, and Henry charmed everyone with their good manners and bright smiles. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that made the grazing scarce and winters that killed cattle. There were illnesses and injuries and the constant, grinding work of keeping a ranch running. But Warren and Delilah faced it all together, and the love between them never wavered. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year. One winter evening, nearly 10 years after that night in the barn, Warren and Delilah sat on the porch together, wrapped in blankets and watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were inside, Marcus helping Henry with his reading while Rose played with her dolls. The air was cold, but there was no wind and it was peaceful. "You ever think about that night?" Warren asked quietly. "The night we met," Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think about it all the time. I think about how cold I was, how close I came to giving up." "I am so glad I found you," Warren said. "I am so glad you stayed." "I am glad I stayed too," Delilah said. She looked up at him, this man who had saved her life in more ways than one. "Do you remember what you said to me? When I was so cold I wanted to leave, wanted to let the winter take me." Warren smiled and pulled her closer, holding her tight against his chest. "I held you close and said, 'Please stay with me.' And I did," Delilah said softly. "I stayed. And look at everything we have built." Warren looked out over the ranch, the home they had created together, the family they had raised. "It is more than I ever dreamed of," he admitted. "More than I thought I deserved." "You deserve all of this and more," Delilah said fiercely. "You are a good man, Warren Quincy, the best man I have ever known." "And you are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met," Warren replied. "I love you, Delilah. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Delilah said, and she kissed him as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Years continued to pass. Marcus grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did and worked alongside Warren every day. Rose grew into a beautiful, spirited girl who dreamed of becoming a teacher like her mother had been. Henry grew into a cheerful boy who loved horses and could gentle even the wildest colt with patience and kindness. Warren and Delilah grew older too, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. But they still held hands when they walked. They still sat together on the porch every evening, watching the sunset. They still loved each other with the same intensity they had felt as newlyweds, if not more. The Lazy Q prospered, becoming one of the most successful ranches in Montana. Warren was respected throughout the territory as a fair and honest businessman, and people came from miles around to buy his cattle. Delilah became known for her kindness and her sharp mind, and she helped many other ranch wives with advice and support when times were hard. They hosted dinners and dances at the ranch, welcoming neighbors and friends. They celebrated christenings and weddings. They mourned losses and celebrated victories. They lived a full, rich life, surrounded by family and friends and the land they loved. When Marcus turned 21, Warren officially made him a partner in the ranch, and Delilah cried tears of pride as she watched her son shake hands with his father, sealing the deal. Marcus had grown into everything they had hoped, strong and kind and hardworking, and she knew the Lazy Q would be in good hands when Warren was ready to step back. Rose eventually did become a teacher, opening a small school in Bridger Creek and teaching the children of ranchers and townsfolk alike. She met a young lawyer named Daniel Wright, a good man who loved books as much as she did, and they married in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch. Delilah watched her daughter dance with her new husband and remembered her own wedding day, how happy and hopeful she had been, and her heart swelled with joy. Henry, true to his nature, became a horse trainer and breeder, developing a reputation for producing some of the finest horses in Montana. He traveled often, buying and selling stock, but he always came home to the Lazy Q, always made time for his family. Warren and Delilah became grandparents, and they adored their grandchildren with the same fierce love they had always shown their own children. They taught the little ones to ride and to read, to work hard and be kind. They told them stories about the old days, about how their grandmother had come to Montana with nothing and their grandfather had built the ranch with his own 2 hands. One spring evening, when Delilah was 60 years old and Warren was 65, they sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. The sun was setting, turning the mountains purple and gold, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter ringing out clear and bright. "You have any regrets?" Warren asked, reaching over to take Delilah's hand. Delilah thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about Ohio and her parents and her brother, all of them gone now. She thought about the cold night in the barn when she had been so close to giving up. She thought about the life she might have had if she had gone back east instead of coming to the lazy Q. "No," she said finally, squeezing Warren's hand. "No regrets. Every choice I made led me here to you, to this life. I would not change a single thing." Warren smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Neither would I. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Delilah, the very best." "And you saved my life," Delilah said. "Not just that night in the barn, though you did that too. You saved me from a life of loneliness and grief. You gave me a reason to live again. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Warren corrected gently. "That is what marriage is it not? Two people choosing each other every single day and building a life together." "Yes," Delilah agreed. "That is exactly what it is." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set and the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Marcus came out onto the porch, carrying his youngest daughter, a 2-year-old with curly dark hair who was rubbing her eyes sleepily. "We are heading home," Marcus said. "Do you need anything before we go?" "We are fine," Warren assured him. "Drive safe." Marcus kissed his mother's cheek and shook his father's hand, then carried his daughter out to the wagon where his wife was already waiting. Rose and Henry and their families left shortly after, calling out goodbyes and promises to visit again soon. When they were alone, Warren and Delilah went inside and got ready for bed. They had moved to a bedroom on the first floor a few years ago, when the stairs became too much of a challenge, and they had made it cozy with a big bed and a fireplace that Warren kept stoked through the cold nights. They lay together in the darkness, Delilah's head on Warren's chest, his arm around her shoulders. They had lain like this for nearly 40 years, and it still felt as natural as breathing. "Warren," Delilah said softly. "Yes, thank you for asking me to stay. Thank you for holding me close that night and not letting me give up." Warren pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for building this life with me." "I would do it all again in a heartbeat," Delilah said. "Every single moment." "So would I," Warren agreed. "So would I." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and they dreamed of the life they had built together, a life full of love and laughter and hard work and joy. A life that had started with a simple act of kindness on a cold winter night and had grown into something beautiful and lasting. The Lazy Q continued to thrive for many more years. Marcus took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch as Warren and Delilah grew older, but they were still very much a part of it, offering advice and helping out when they could. They watched their grandchildren grow and start families of their own, and they marveled at how much the world was changing around them. Montana became a state in 1889, and Warren and Delilah celebrated with the rest of the territory, proud to be part of this wild, beautiful place they called home. The railroad expanded, bringing more people and more opportunities. Towns that had been tiny outposts grew into thriving communities. The Wild West was becoming a little less wild, a little more settled, but it still had that untamed spirit that had drawn them in the first place. Warren and Delilah grew old together, their bodies slowing down but their minds still sharp, their love still strong. They spent their days sitting on the porch, watching the ranch bustle with activity, surrounded by family. They told stories to anyone who would listen, stories about the early days, about building the ranch, about falling in love. And they always told the story of that night in the barn, the night when the cold made Delilah want to leave, and Warren held her close and said, "Please stay with me." It became a family legend, a story told at weddings and anniversaries, a reminder of where they all came from and what they had built together. It was a story about taking chances and choosing love and holding on even when things were hard. Warren passed away in his sleep at the age of 82, peacefully and without pain. Delilah held his hand as he took his last breath, and she whispered, "Thank you for everything, my love. Wait for me. I will find you again." She lived for 2 more years after that, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them carrying on the legacy of the Lazy Q. She told them stories about Warren, about how much he had loved them all, about what a good man he had been. And when her time came, she closed her eyes with a smile on her face, ready to see her husband again. The family buried her next to Warren on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a big oak tree they had planted together 40 years ago. The headstones were simple, just their names and dates, but underneath, someone had carved the words, "They chose each other and they built a life." The Lazy Q continued for generations after that, always in the Quincy family, always run with the same values of hard work and fairness and love that Warren and Delilah had established. Their descendants married and had children of their own, and they all knew the story of their ancestors, the cowboy and the girl who met on the coldest night of the year and chose to stay with each other forever. And on winter nights, when the snow was falling and the wind was howling, the family would gather around the fireplace in the big house, and they would tell the story again. The story of how Delilah almost gave up in that barn, how cold she was, how close to the edge. And how Warren found her and held her close and said, "Please stay with me." And she stayed, and they built a life, and it was beautiful,